The round-robin group stage of VCT Americas Stage 1 has concluded. We now know all 8 teams that are heading into playoffs, so it's time to do a power ranking of all 12 teams heading into this next part of the stage. In case you don't know, I do weekly power rankings. We do a power ranking after every single weekend, so it's time to do one more before playoffs and see where these teams are at heading into this very important part of the season. So this is the board we have today. We will be going from the bottom to the top, which means we are starting with the perpetual 12th place at this point, Furia. So Furia at least had a good game against MIBR this week, but I didn't see enough to make me want to move them up. They did take a map off of them. They had a pretty commanding lead on that map, but then almost blew it. But they were able to close out that Ascent map. So now they have 2 maps that they at least look decent on. Lotus previously was the only map that this team could do much of anything on, and then any other map was just a disaster. So maybe Ascent starts to be that second map for them, but we'll see if they can keep up that good performance. Either way, I do think Furia did a good job in that match, but they're still number 12. I still think they're the worst team. Moving on to number 11, down 2 spots from last week, we have 2 Game. Things were starting to look up for 2 Game during this stage 1, especially after that win over Loud. They got that win. Their next match against Crew, they did take a map off of them. They still lost it though. And then against 100 Thieves, they did lose that one 2-0, but they kept that first map close. It did go into overtime. But then against Sentinels, none of that strong performance was showing. It felt like before that Sentinels match, that 2 Game were playing well. They were just getting outclassed. It was clear that a lot of their players maybe just weren't up to the same standard as a lot of the other tier 1 teams are, but they were still playing good Valorant. But against Sentinels, they just could not get much of anything going. Sentinels were playing very well, shutting down any chance of an upset happening, but it would have been nice for 2 Game to show a little bit more fight in that one. So I had them at number 9 for a couple weeks there after their win against Loud. They stayed there for a while, but they're back down to the second worst spot in the league. Maybe in stage 2 when Spike comes in, this team can get a couple wins under their belt, but for now they're on a losing streak and they won't be able to break it until stage 2 starts. Moving on to the number 10 spot, in the same spot as last week, we have Loud. I think Loud is the most unlucky team in the entire VCT right now. They did not have a win during the entire group stage after having a pretty solid kickoff that did end on 2 losses. Right now they have a 7 Game losing streak on their hands. And it's not like they're playing terrible or anything, especially their last 2 matches, they've been playing well. Hard fought game against Sentinels and then a very close game against EG, where both Pancata and Luke Show were fragging incredibly heavy. Both those players had incredible matches and were leading the entire server, but despite getting to match point, they end up getting outplayed in overtime by Evil Geniuses, and then they just can't hold on to the lead in map 3. They definitely had their opportunities. Some of their players are playing very well. They just can't seem to get a win. They are apparently getting rid of their head coach. We'll see how that coaching staff looks, and maybe that can turn something around, because that probably is a part of it. When you have players that are playing pretty well, they've had good performances by Digizin, by Kawazine, Tui's when he came back into the roster, has played pretty well, and Lucio looks like one of the best rookies in the entire league right now, so the fact that this team just does not have a win is perplexing. Moving on to the number 9 spot, moving down 2 spots from last week, just missing out on playoffs, is Leviathan. So Leviathan were the favorites in a lot of people's eyes when it came to that match against Energy. That was the match that would determine that last playoff spot in Group Omega, so it was a very big match, and Leviathan did play well at times, but that icebox did look pretty rough. Energy in control pretty much the whole time during that icebox match. Leviathan just not finding an answer to that composition. Things were looking better for Leviathan after that embarrassing loss to C9. They ended up getting a win over Furia, pretty dominant one. Very good vibes after that. Then they have a close game against G2, so it looks like, hey, maybe this team can actually contend with the best. But then playing against Energy for that final spot, they just could not keep up that same performance despite a pretty good map 1. They lost that overtime, and that basically sealed their fate for this stage. Maybe in stage 2 this team ends up doing something. I think this team has a lot of talent on it, but the whole roles are just kind of out of whack. However, they do seem to be fixing it. King is looking better on Duelist now. We also have Demon 1 playing some Duelist, playing a similar role to what he did on EG, which I think is a recipe for him to thrive. And Demon 1 has been looking better, but there are still some players that need to pick up the slack. We'll see what they can do for stage 2, but for now, they are out of playoffs, and those bottom 4 are the only 4 teams that are out of playoffs. So, how are the playoff teams looking in terms of ranking? At the number 8 spot, moving up 3 spots from last week, we have Energy. I was quite impressed impressed with that win over Leviathan. I was expecting Lev to win that one, but not only did Energy win that one, they were in control for a lot of it, and they ended up 2-0ing that team. Much better game from Mata there. He's a player that I've been looking for him to heat up. We know he's supremely talented, he just hasn't really shown it all the time during this stage. One of the big reasons why this team has been doing very well is because their top players haven't really been hitting. Som had a really good start to the stage, he started to quiet down, but now we're seeing players like Ethan perform better. Brock has started to look like he's a better fit. So there are some good signs with this team, despite the fact that their IGL and FNS still can't break more than 19 kills. I don't really have a lot of faith in this team for playoffs. They're gonna have a pretty tough matchup whatever way it goes. They will be playing the loser of MIBR versus 100 Thieves. I think they would match up better against 100 Thieves. They've already beat them this year. So we'll see what ends up happening there, but either way, they cannot lose a game in playoffs. They are in the single elimination lower bracket. Moving on to number 7, down 2 spots from last week, we have 100 Thieves. So 100 Thieves are a team that I've been putting in the top 5 of the power rankings for a couple weeks now. Not super confident in what I've been seeing from this team, but enough good things there that I think, okay, this team does look pretty solid. However, they do end up losing their last game of the group stage against Crew. Not winning a map in that match. It was 2 pretty close maps, but they couldn't win more than 2 rounds at a time. Very strange thing to see, and there were a lot of mistakes by the team as well, like the missed EU ults that ended up costing them that icebox match. Just a team looking not as in sync as we've seen them during this stage. They do have the 3rd spot in their group. They're up against MIBR. I do not think they're the favorites for that one, but they did beat them at kickoff, so maybe there is something there. Thankfully for them, Cryocells has been incredibly consistent throughout this entire stage. He's still the top rated player in the entire Americas right now. EU is starting to look good, but Asuna is as inconsistent as ever, and Boostio and Xander are struggling. Definitely some things need to be tightened up heading into playoffs. If this team can play confident, then they can be effective, so we'll see what they do for playoffs. Last year they did look pretty okay heading into that playoff bracket, and then they ended up winning the whole thing, so maybe they end up doing that again, but we'll see how it shakes out for this team. Moving on to number 6, we have a team moving up 2 spots from where they were last week, Evil Geniuses. So maybe this spot ends up being a little bit high for EG. I think this is the highest they've been all season. However, I will say that this team has looked pretty good for the past 2 matches. They ended up dominating Crew 2 weeks ago, very impressive game from a lot of players. And then they have an incredibly close game against Loud where they probably got outplayed for the majority of that match, but they still came away with the win. Potter's coaching has seemed to be getting through in recent weeks. Ye has looked a lot better, one of the main reasons why they didn't lose that map too. IC is starting to get confident. Superman has looked very consistent this stage. And of course, Derek can be very good in the clutch. So this team is starting to heat up heading into playoffs, which is very important. They do have the last spot of their group, but they technically have the same record as 100 Thieves. 3-2 record heading into playoffs, with 2 of those wins being at the end of the stage, one of them being a very hard matchup in Crew. So I've really liked what I've seen from them recently, so I felt like they deserve to be in the top 6 this time. Moving on to the number 5 spot, moving up 1 spot from where they were last week, we have Crew. So Crew had a pretty disastrous game against Evil Geniuses, but they bounced back in a big way. 2-0 100 Thieves, being in control for the majority of that match, looking much better than they did against EG. I don't think EG win that matchup if it happens again, but either way, that match against 100 Thieves went exactly the way that Crew needed it to. 2-0 victory. Both Kesnet and Shy looked very good during that match. Individuals are playing a lot better than they did in the previous match, so a lot of good signs from this team heading into playoffs. They did lock up top spot in their group, so they are only 1 win away from making it to Toronto. They are going to be playing the winner of MIBR versus 100 Thieves. So they're probably hoping 100 Thieves win that one because they've already proven that they can beat them, and MIBR beat them at kickoff and now look a lot better than they did at kickoff. So we'll see who they end up facing, but Crew needs to have a good playoff run. They collapsed in playoffs during stage 1 last year, so they're going to hope that they can at least make 2 internationals this year instead of just champs. Moving on to the number 4 spot, same spot as last week, we have C9. Really impressed with what I've seen from C9. They ended up taking a map off of G2, and they did it pretty dominantly. 13-4 scoreline against one of the best teams in the entire world. That's incredibly impressive. Really solid attack slide on that Haven. I loved how they were playing at that one, just not letting G2 even get a chance to retake. Very good counterplay from them. And then they had a really good Pearl where they almost made the comeback happen, but then G2 were able to shut it down, as well as they had a pretty dominant map 1. So just like the week before, there's an argument for C9 to be in the top 3. They have proved that they are a very good team. I do think this is probably the best version of C9 that we've ever seen. However, if I'm going to believe that this team is legit, I need them to do well in playoffs. They are up against Sentinels, and we haven't seen Sentinels on the Power Rankings board, so I do know who I'm picking in that matchup, but C9 have been very impressive. Their 2 losses this stage were very close, almost beating MIBR. They were 1 round away at one point, and then a very close map 3 against G2. So there's some really good things going on with this team right now. Vic looks very good. Oxy is starting to get a bit more consistent. Zeppa is continuing his renaissance year, proving the haters wrong. There is a lot to like about this team, but playoffs is always where this team has collapsed. They will always look good in the round robin of stage 1, but when it comes to a do or die game, they have historically been quite bad. Thankfully for them, unlike last year, they aren't in a single elimination to start the bracket. Even if they lose to Sentinels, they will have a chance to go through the lower bracket, so we'll see what they can end up doing. This team does look very strong. I just don't know if I can put them in the top 3 right now. Moving on to the number 3 spot, the same spot as last week, we have Sentinels. Now, there are a lot of people doubting this team despite their strong run in stage 1 so far. The biggest challenge that they've had so far is that match against Crew, and Crew ended up 2-0ing them. And then their matchups after that, you could make the argument, were pretty easy. Evil Geniuses, they had a very easy game against them. That Loud game was quite close, but they ended up winning that one. And then against 2Name, they pretty much swept them aside without any trouble. And that definitely is a concern of mine, the fact that this team hasn't really had a top tier competitor. So me keeping them in this top 3 spot, I feel like is pretty generous at this point. But I will say that I do believe in this team. I think this team is primed for a good playoff run. They're up against C9 to start the bracket, a team that typically does fail in those situations. However, it honestly might be beneficial for them to lose that one, because then they would avoid G2, and then they'll get to play Evil Geniuses. So maybe the lower bracket ends up being more favorable to them. Any team is going to want to avoid G2, but I don't think Sentinels are going to throw that game. I think they're going to want to win that one. They have a lot to prove. I think they want to get the revenge on G2. Zekin had a very good game against 2Game. I think that was a game he really needed. He's been good but inconsistent during stage 1. He's a player that I think has a lot more to give than what he's given this year. Bang is looking really solid. John QT and Narrate have been consistent during this stage. The only real concern for me right now in terms of individual performance is still Zelsis. But Zelsis is a big game player. He can come up really big when it's a do or die situation. So in playoffs, I definitely trust this roster. They have experience in these situations. I think they are going to look good. I do think they have a pretty good chance of making it to Toronto, but we will see how it shakes out. They're going to have to get through a pretty tough opponent in C9 to start. Moving on to the number 2 spot, no change from last week, we have MIBR. They've been at the spot for a while. They've looked very good throughout this entire stage. Yes, that match against Furia was a lot closer than I think they would have wanted. However, I will give them the benefit of the doubt that that Ascent map just did not go their way. They were missing a lot of shots during that map, losing in some pretty favorable positions for them, so hey, players whiff sometimes, that happens. But then map 3 ended up being pretty strong for them overall, so maybe they just didn't take Furia as seriously as they should have, and then that map 2 ended up waking them up. So I do think this team is primed for a good playoff run. I think they're going to really want to get the revenge on 100 Thieves with how 100 Thieves embarrassed them to start kickoff. And a lot of players on this team are hitting right now. Ospas had a very good last couple matches. He's a player that started the stage kind of inconsistent, still really good. Even Ospas's worst is better than most people's best. But now he's starting to look more like the player that can drag teams to wins when some of his other teammates aren't playing as well. And that Fury match is a pretty good example of that. He was looking insane. So we'll see how playoffs ends up shaking up for this team. This is the best version of MIBR that this organization has ever had. Playoffs is where it is important. They've looked really strong and I think the stronger group, but playoffs is a different beast entirely. So we'll see what they can end up doing. And moving on to the number 1 spot, no surprise here, no change, is G2. Still at the top of the power rankings, did look kind of scary against C9. That would have just thrown this top 4 into complete disarray, but they end up holding off the upset. So kept them in the same spot and also kept the team that nearly beat them in the same spot as well. Felt like that was fair. I know there's probably going to be comments about C9 should be higher and whatnot in center, wash, or whatever, but we'll really see how it turns out at playoffs. But for G2, top spot of their group now, Joggermo playing very well. Not really any weak points to look at on this team. Every player is hitting, and it's not like this team has been like fat and happy either. They have had some struggles during the stage, which I do think is actually beneficial for them. It's good to not just 2-0 teams every time. They've had to win their last 3 2-1. They definitely know that they're the best, but I don't think they're letting that get to them and just like enter matches extremely cocky. They're on a mission. They know what they want to do. They faced adversity. This team has a ton of experience at this point. They want to look solid heading into Toronto if they can qualify, which they're only 1 win away from. I think they probably get it done, but we'll see how long this undefeated in their own region streak can go, because this is something that I don't think any any other team has done since the franchise league started. It is incredibly difficult to stay undefeated in this region. There are some very good teams. They've already almost lost. I do think that streak gets broken at some point. Is it this playoff bracket? We will see. So that's everything that I have to talk about today. These are my power rankings heading into playoffs. I will do one more after playoffs. I'm not going to do one in between playoffs because that wouldn't really make a lot of sense. But when the stage is officially wrapped up, we will be doing one more before Toronto starts. But either way, playoffs is going to be a very interesting time. I will be making a video previewing that playoff, so look out for that in the next couple days. But anyways, please click like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.